You are listening to the Whiskey Tango Chaos podcast.
He is our first officer guest.
So on that deployment, we took down about 3,200 kilos of coke.
Our first joint service Navy guest.
I love the clowns, but I do not miss the circus.
And our first service academy guest.
It's basically another devil's deal.
So there I was, definitely the most publicized courts-martial.
You know, kind of sends chills down your spine.
I've been had.
That's right, sailor. I need you to go stand the watch.
And the chaos starts now.
Now the cat's trying to get Amanda's whiskey. Make for a quick night for you, little guy. So, all right, welcome back to the Whiskey Tango Chaos podcast. I'm your host, Clayton Spakes, a Master Sergeant in the United States Air Force, here with my wife, Amanda.
Hello.
And joined today by our special guest and my brother-in-law, Kam Wright. He is our first officer guest.
Yes.
Our first joint service Navy guest. And our first service academy guest. So getting the trifecta all at once. Welcome, Kam. Thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, so that's the kind of the short on Kam. We won't get too far into his career because we'll let him tell it. I promise he'll tell it better than I do. But first, like every episode, we will start with what are we drinking? And as always, ladies first, babe, what do you got?
All right. So I picked this specifically tonight because you're going to be our guest. It felt like a very themed bottle to choose. And you being in the Navy, I went with the Jefferson's Ocean Aged at Sea Straight Bourbon Whiskey Small Batch. It felt appropriate. This one was a private barrel selection from the Party Source down in Covington, Kentucky.
Yeah, we drink it on one of the. It's been a while, but it was on one of our other episodes.
It's good. It's got
and it's wheated.
It is wheated, and it has a whole long list of the journey that it was on, the voyage it was while it was HSC, and that particular part is gimmicky, but I'm all for a gimmick.
Yeah, it's decent bourbon.
Good. It's decent bourbon, not a whole lot of bite.
Have you heard of them before, Kam?
This is the one that bounces around on a barrel on the bottom of a ship for a little while.
Yeah, they basically put it on some like transit ship or shipping container, whatever, and it just goes around forever. And then the tag tells you like where all it's been. 100% a gimmick. Like, be willing to bet that makes almost zero or maybe exactly zero effect on like how it ages. I don't know. Maybe there's something weird with like the expansion and contraction as it goes through like different climates. I don't know, but it's a cool gimmick, and it helps that like the bourbon's at least decent. It's not like you crack it open and it tastes like crap. What do you think?
This is the first time I've tried it. I'm getting some notes of caramel to it. It's good. It's smooth.
I figured most barrels just kind of sit in a warehouse, you know, and then if it's out there bouncing around on a ship, it's getting well sloshed, a lot of surface area on the inside of that cask. Maybe.
You were also sloshed around on a ship for a while, weren't you?
I've seen the videos. He was definitely sloshed around. So we'll go guest next. Kam, what are you drinking?
Tonight, I am drinking a single malt from Scotland, Oban 14. It's one of my staples that I have around the house. Oban is on the west coast of Scotland. It's a little bit peatier, a little salty. It's got some salted caramel notes to it, but not quite as strong.
Those
as
aren't bad notes to have.
Oh, so be Ron Swanson approved?
I think it's like Ron Swanson light. Yeah. My spirit animal. It's certainly not a like drinking a campfire like you get with Lagavulin.
Yeah.
But it's a good easy drinking winter scotch, I think.
I'll have to check it out. I have to give Kam a little bit of credit. Jason Gaddis was probably the first person to get me into scotch, like at our wedding. But then I kind of hit a lull where I didn't really drink like a ton of it. And then Kam was the next person to reignite my scotch fascination, which was where I started with liquor, to be honest, in terms of like actually drinking good liquor, and then went bourbon from there, which I think we've talked about before, which is maybe a little weird, but it worked out. So thanks for making me just a little bit more of a degenerate. I appreciate it.
A sophisticated degenerate, though.
Yeah.
Expensive hobby. Sorry, Amanda.
I don't think, like, the older I get, like, I don't think I have any hobbies that aren't expensive anymore. All right, so I guess it's my turn. I think we talked about a couple episodes that I'm trying to branch out and get away from, or not get away from, but like not just drink regular bourbon. So I'm stretching out into ryes. So this is the Willett Family Reserve small batch rye. It is 108.8 proof. Again, it's cask strength, so that makes sense. And yeah, I've seen like really good reviews on this stuff. We'll post a picture on the Instagram so you can see what it looks like. But it's got the like kind of the peppery, spicy flavors and aromas that you would expect, but I still get a fair amount of caramel. Not as much as I did in that. So while we were all together for Christmas, we went to this whiskey bar and I got to try Midwinter's Night Dram, and that was very caramelly, like almost it tasted more like bourbon than rye to me, to be honest. But you can tell it's cast strength. It's got a little bit of burn, which I enjoy. But so, like we mentioned, you are a Navy officer. I don't know if we said what you do now, but you are currently a JAG. So for our non-military folks, or maybe somebody that's never watched NCIS or any of that stuff, that means he's a lawyer. But that is not always what he has done in the Navy. So we'll kind of let you tell your story. But what was your path to the military? I guess what made you want to join, and then more specifically, we talked about you were an academy grad. Once you decided you wanted to join, how did you know that a service academy was the way to go for you?
Went to a public school in Florida, Jacksonville, Florida, where I grew up. My school happened to have a naval ROTC unit, a JROTC unit, and I got involved with that freshman year through senior year. Our unit was actually incredibly good, always ranked within the top 5 of the country. And so the top 10% of ROTC units actually have the privilege of applying for Secretary of the Navy's nomination. So it was fairly routine for our school to send at least one, if not 2, graduating seniors to a service academy every year. So my senior year, we ended up sending 4. 3 of us went to Annapolis, and 1 went to West Point. So yeah, I did JROTC. I really enjoyed it. Kind of thought the military would be cool, at least for a little bit, go serve my country. I also didn't really have a budget to pay for. So
that story sounds familiar.
Yeah, right. That's how they get you. But growing up in Florida, I was also an IB student, international baccalaureate. So I had Florida Bright Futures vested for in-state schools. So I had applied for ROTC scholarships as a backup at University of Florida. But I had buddies going to Annapolis. I figured if I'm going to do the naval officer thing, it'd be great to have a job right after college. At the time, it was like 2008. So the economy crapped out, and it hit everybody's family and my family as well. And so I wasn't wanting to take on debt to go to school. The ultimate backup plan, if everything failed, was I was going to go and enlist in the Marines. But I got into Annapolis. So senior year, I got my acceptance academically from the admissions department, and then simultaneously applying for nominations. So I ended up receiving a nomination from Senator Bill Nelson, and in the spring of 2009, I officially got my appointment. I got a phone call from my congressman telling me I was going to Annapolis. So
how was that feeling, getting a phone call from a congressman saying, "Hey, you got in"?
Especially as a high schooler, right? You're not even
it's pretty wild. Yeah. So went to Annapolis. I remember I-Day pretty well. Induction Day, July 1st. 2009, got through plebe year, and then the next 3 years it rotated between being a blast, but also, kind of replicating the first year because you're still at the academy, but you're not, now you're in charge of people, right? So plebe year, you just do what you're told. You just shut up and do what you're told. Youngster year, second class year, and especially first year, you're actually responsible for other people. So it's a fantastic.
So for those not in the military, not in the military and not familiar with Naval Academy specifically, plebe year is just your freshman year, but you're essentially nothing. And you, like Cam said, it's like shut up and color, learn everything you can, and do what you're told.
The term plebe comes from the Roman term plebiscite, the peasants. Yeah. So you don't really have rights. The main nobody tells you this while you're a plebe or even an upperclassman. The main purpose of the plebe is to be the guinea pig for the upper class. For all the upperclassmen, especially the seniors, the firsties that are about to go off and be officers, the plebes are kind of your test run of testing out your leadership style, getting people to follow you, over the long term, not just exercising legitimate power and authority based off rank, but learning how to develop personal relationships and cultivate, mutual respect up and down the chain of command. So the purpose of the plebe is not not just to be crapped on. It's to be it really is to be the guinea pig in the laboratory for the upperclassmen. But they don't tell you that. You don't realize that until after you're gone.
It's probably got to be some of the like basic training mentality too for us, where like it's kind of like tear you down to like build you back up. You don't like you coming in, even with your experience in JROTC, you still don't know what you don't know. Like trying to get ingrained in like the military culture and like just how the military does things can be difficult. And so it sounds like some of that like plebe year is a lot like us going through basic training on the enlisted side, tear you down and then build you up, and hopefully build you up in like the culture and norms of the like society or subset of society that you're about to become a part of. So now you're about a decade out of the academy. Have you had any thought, like since you've left the academy, of like what your career or life would have looked like had you gone like to a civilian institution? And do you think you still would have commissioned from there, or do you think your life would have just taken a completely different path?
Not sure. The service academies, we have a saying, hashtag not college, because it isn't college. It's its own lifestyle. It's very different. So I think I would have been a different person had I been to a civilian institution and done WTC part-time rather than being, rather than living, breathing, and bleeding in the uniform every single day. I also met my wife, Erin, Amanda's sister, 2 years my senior. She was an upperclassman, junior when
there
I was.
There you go, Cam.
You're going to turn that plebe year on its head. Like they're supposed to lead you. Yeah, she will. I'm just kidding.
Well, we didn't actually start dating until she was a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps, and I was still a midshipman. So yeah, I would not have met my wife, and my career would have taken drastically different directions. I would have met different people, had different mentors. So yeah, I think it would have been.
Who knows?
Way different. Who knows?
You brought up an interesting point where they talk about it as like hashtag not college, because I think from the enlisted side, I don't know how it is on the Navy side, but for us, like there's definitely a certain like stereotype that goes along with our service academy grads and like the officers that they produce versus the officers that come from name your other commissioning source, right? For us, like the biggest stereotypes with like the Air Force Service Academy is that they tend to have their own like good old boys club, because it's an incredibly small group of people when you think about it in terms of population and even in terms of military population, especially if they were anywhere near the same year group, so like plus or minus 3 years, you probably know them or at least have heard of them or know somebody that think like 7 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, right? And so I think some of it, there probably is some truth to there being a little bit of good old boys club on the Air Force side, especially for the rated guys, for the flyers, all know each other and will look out for each other, which kind of makes sense. You will look out for the people that you know. But then because of that, I think it's led to like some bad perception of like what an academy grad is on the Air Force side. Does that exist in the Navy as well? Obviously you're not enlisted, but do you know of like those same stereotypes existing for the Navy where they look at academy grads differently than say OCS? Is it OCS or OTS for you guys?
OCS. So I would say it's less pronounced than it used to be. So there was a time, especially 15, 20 years ago, when academy grads got a real bad rap. There's a term, it's meant to be derogatory, but it's ring knocker. So for those of us that wear a class ring from Annapolis, if you wear it around the ship or, anytime you touch anything with your hand, it knocks, right? So, he's a ring knocker. He's an academy grad.
Or think like Kevin Spacey in House of Cards.
Yeah.
It's in the desk. So the empirical data suggests there's nothing better about the character of an academy grad versus an OCS grad or ROTC grad as you progress in your career, right? The percentage of admirals that were Naval Academy graduates has fallen over the past couple of decades. It's still relatively high, and I think even among the other services, but it's not as pronounced as it once used to be. The good old boys club, working up the ladder. I think what matters more now is your leadership, your character, your ability to lead others. So there's nothing that suggests that academy grads are going to stick around for careers and do 20 plus years more so than any other commissioning source. I always got told during my line officer time, when one of my sailors would find out, oh, you're an academy grad, I would not have guessed that. And of course, then you start thinking, well, what's the subtext? What would you expect from an academy grad? what is it that I'm doing, either right or wrong, that makes me not fit into whatever stereotype you have.
That's how I said that same thing to my old DO when I was at Right Pat before we came out here. He was a Air Force Academy grad, and that's what I said the same thing to him, and he kind of had the same reaction. That's what I was like, hey, like, sir, I promise, like, if you hear that, if you ever hear some from an enlisted person and we say like, oh, we would not have expected that you were Academy grad, it's 100% a compliment, because like we're basing like off of the stereotype. So if we say you're not, we wouldn't have guessed you're Academy grad, and we were saying like, oh, you don't come across as like selfish, or that you are just trying to be a part of the good old boys club and promote as quickly as you can, like that you're actually looking out for us, you're relatable. At least from my perspective, that's usually what it means. It's like, oh, because there's certainly like you could have good stereotypes from the Academy grads, right? Like they tend to have a much better understanding of military life and what that's going to look like coming out, right? Because they've already, to some extent, been living it for the last 4 years.
Yeah.
But we tend to like cling on to the negative stereotypes. So usually if you hear an enlisted guy tell you that, yeah, they wouldn't have guessed you were from the Academy, it's going to be a good thing. So you finished the Academy in 2013, and then you moved on to your first career in the Navy. So in roughly 10 years, you've managed to be on your second career already. But so what'd you do first for the Navy, and what was that life like?
Yeah, so I went into Annapolis thinking I wanted to do political science. I took one poli-sci course for about 2 weeks and realized I hated it.
This is not for me.
Well, politics, history, I can read relatively well. So I figured out, I can study this stuff on my own time. I really dislike the subjective grading of papers and just the sheer amount of just nothingness that I felt with that major. So I was always strong in mathematics. I started at the academy. My plebe year, I took differential equations in Calc 3. So I decided to major in math because for mathematics, you can go into engineering, you can go into law, you can go into medicine, whatever you want to down the road. And I was good at math, so I stuck with what I was good with. So that garnered the attention of naval reactors. So there is an organization in the Navy that oversees the operation, development, and personnel within the nuclear Navy. So all of our submarines are nuclear powered, all of our aircraft carriers are nuclear powered, and there are sailors and officers that operate those nuclear power plants at sea. And this is independent of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which oversees civilian power plants in the country. So I think right now we have more operating reactors in the Navy than there are in the civilian sector in the United States. And the nuclear Navy is a top-notch organization, mishap-free. I forget how many tens of thousands of miles have been navigated now on nuclear power. So really, really, really smart people in the nuke Navy, a bunch of nerds, and a very, very high standard of conduct and a very low tolerance for failure. So,
yeah, but have they ever considered solar or wind powered Navy? Have you?
So we used to do the wind power thing. So my junior year, I put in for my service selection to be a surface nuke. Submariners all have to go through nuclear power school. Surface warfare officers go and drive ships. Surface warfare nuclear officers are kind of a half-breed. So the pipeline was something like this. You go to a ship, you learn how to be a Divo. And then after that tour, you go to nuclear power school and prototype for a year. And then you'll go back to an aircraft carrier as a nuclear engineer. So that was my path. So I graduated in 2013. I chose a frigate for my first ship, USS McCluskey FFG 41. We deployed for 6 months down off Mexico and did counter-narcotic interdictions with Coast Guard law enforcement detachments. So we would receive intel for boats that were running drugs up to the U.S. or into Mexico, and we would interdict them at sea, board them, take their drugs, arrest the personnel. So on that deployment, we took down about 3,200 kilos of coke, which is pretty cool.
That is a lot.
Wow.
It was
That's
a great
not a small amount.
No, there was a lot. It was a lot of pure cocaine. We arrested, I think, around 20 traffickers. It was a great deployment because we were independently deployed without a strike group, and we kind of just did our own thing. And then came back from that deployment and immediately went into decommissioning the ship. So early 2015, went to Charleston for nuke power school. I stayed in Charleston for prototype, which is a series of practical instructions on a decommissioned submarine. So after prototype, I went back to San Diego to the USS Carl Vinson, CVN 70, America's favorite carrier. And
We got to see it.
We did get to, I remember we
You
got to
did.
see it. That is also not a small ship.
And Cam made me salute and ask permission to come aboard like a jackass.
He did. And I stood behind you and just giggled the entire time.
As I was doing it, I could see the face of the guy that was like letting us on the ship, and I was like, I've been had. Like this, like damn it. But anyway, yeah, it was a cool experience. Like for an Air Force guy that's never been on any Navy ships other than that, it's like a wild experience, especially for your first one to be an aircraft carrier because it was fucking huge.
Yeah,
it's like you don't like even from like seeing them like in Norfolk and stuff like that, like you don't have a real appreciation for, or I didn't have a real appreciation for how big it is until you're like literally walking onto it and then walking around inside of it.
It was massive.
Like,
it was like a
God.
Floating city essentially. It
was wild.
It was just rooms upon rooms, and we took a couple of pictures, and well, we can share.
That was also one of the first times that drove home like the differences in Air Force and Navy culture to me, but we can get into that later. Yeah. So anyway, so you get to the Vinson in San Diego as a nuke officer. Now, actually, like officially, like gone through prototyping school, gone through everything. So, what was that lifestyle like? Sorry, I shouldn't. I chuckle because I remember what like. Like, oh yeah, we just never saw Cam.
They give you about 4 months to qualify propulsion plant watch officer. And after that, you're on the watch bill. So you're standing watch as an operator, supervising the plant operation, but you also are given a division. So I had nuclear trained machinist mate mechanics. I also had conventional mechanics that had no nuke background. So the level of training and the level of maturity between my sailors varied widely. I would have, E6s who had 4 or 5 years in the Navy, incredibly smart, some of whom earned commissions to become officers. And then I also had E3s and E2s who were like straight out of boot camp, straight out of A school, and thought they'd be working on cars. But, a division of about 120 strong, that's a lot of people, a lot of manpower.
Yeah.
A lot of training that has to get done.
I was going to say, even just like 120 different like personalities too, and stories and problems that they're dealing with or challenges that they're,
I think you also
facing or conquering. So it's like, that's a lot of people just to lead in general, let alone then also be training to do this, the job.
You also brought up like something else that's interesting, and it's a difference between like the Air Force and the Navy. So Navy on the enlisted side tends to promote like very quickly through E6 compared to like some of the other branches. So like so you said like, what'd you say, like 4 to 5 years or 5 to 6 years, and they'd be in E6 already. Where like for us, like you wouldn't even be close, like 4 to 5 years, and you're doing great if you're in E5, and then probably another like 3 or so years before you're in E6 for most people.
It depends on, for the Navy, I think you call it an MOS. We call it a rate, or your rating. Machinist mate, electrician's mate, yeoman, master at arms. It really depends on your rate as to how quickly you're going to promote. So, for instance, with hospital corpsmen, our medics, very difficult to make chief petty officer. It's hard to make E7, and a lot of times it's hard to make E6. The nuclear Navy, on the other hand, a lot of them can make E5 simply by re-enlisting for an additional year while they're at prototype. And there are pretty large retention bonuses, cash bonuses to keep personnel. Retention's a huge problem. I'll get to lifestyle in a second. But I've seen a nuke mechanic make chief, make E7 in 7 years.
Wow.
That is wild.
And it seems insane, but one of the reasons is there aren't enough chiefs around. In the Navy, we grow all of our experience organically. We can't just hire somebody in as a propulsion plant supervisor as an E7 or an E8. They have to have come up, and when one of them moves out, we need somebody to move in.
It makes me wonder, like, what do you do then, right? So, like, if you're the E7, like, if somebody makes E7 in 7 years, so if they were going to make the Navy a career, so now they've got 13 years to make 2 more ranks if they stay enlisted.
Some of them commission.
Yeah, almost like, why wouldn't you?
So the life as a nuke, it depends on your ship, it depends on manning, and it depends on your operational requirements. But there was a point where we were in 3-section duty while in port.
So
What that means
what is
is
three-section duty?
yeah, so you take the whole department, you divide it into threes,
Okay.
and basically you have to have, at the end of the workday, uh, you have to have a third of the department on board to operate the plant, like overnight, right? So
Okay.
you have your Monday through Friday workday when you're in port. And then on top of that, you have your duty section rotation. So you have 24 hours on, 48 hours off on top of the 5-day work week. So if you have duty on Sunday, you have 24 hours of duty on Sunday. Then you have Monday, Tuesday work days. Then you have duty again on Wednesday. Then you have Thursday, Friday. And then you have another 24-hour work day on Saturday. So what it
So
means is that every third weekend, you're actually getting Saturday and Sunday off at the same time.
but every third weekend. That's insane. So there
Yeah.
really is no work-life balance at all.
No, because you're always thinking about your next duty day. You're always thinking about when I got to be back on the boat for 24 hours. And so, like as a watch officer, if you're standing 24-hour watcho, you have to tour the plant periodically. So I would typically on my duty days be up from 5 a.m. Through about 7 or 8 p.m. I'd be in the plant with a brief break for lunch,
Wow.
and then I have to go down at midnight for certain log reviews and things, and then I'd be back up again probably around 5:30 to prepare the plant for turnover. And then if that happens to be a Monday, well, guess what? You're rolling right into your Monday workday.
Wow.
So you do this continuously for 2.5 years. It gets very tiring. So that's when you're in port. When you're at sea, there are more watchstanders in the plant, and the watch officer has to be. You have to have more people present in the plant. So for a long time there, we stood what we call 5 and dimes. So 3-section in port, you're probably 3-section underway. So 5 hours on, 10 hours off, which means you're cramming a 30-hour cycle into a 24-hour day.
Wow.
So every fourth day, you have at least a 24-hour work day while at sea.
Oof.
So it gets tiring. It gets very tiring very quickly. Your body is always having to adapt to a new clock, a new schedule. On top of that, you're not just doing your shift, right? You are managing in division. You are supervising maintenance schedules. You're scheduling maintenance 3 or 4 months out for the next time you pull into port because you're only in port for a certain amount of time, and you got to take everything apart and put it back together again, and you need a schedule for that. You're also training the guys and gals that are showing up to the ship that need to qualify watch stations to replace the people in the plant who are going to be leaving, right? So it's just a continuous churn. There is no break.
That sounds a lot like on the Intel side of things. Like we have similar burnout with scheduling, and ours is sometimes personnel driven in that we can be undermanned, but more often than not, it's just like the 24/7 ops cycle, and that stuff needs to happen like while ops are happening, or we need to be able to like get the intel out at the speed of relevance, which tends to be pretty quick for us. And so you're working shifts like Panama's, which those aren't terrible. It's like you get every other weekend off and you're only working 12-hour shifts, but it can still be a lot of burnout because you're like, if you're on nights, especially, and you have a family, it's kind of the like, okay, well, do I flip my schedule back to days so that I can hang out with them? Or do I keep my body on like a night shift schedule and then still not really see them? Like it's a whole thing. But then there's also the schedule that a lot of our friends out in Colorado worked, which is miserable. It'd be like 2 days, 2 swings, 2 nights, 2 days off. So you're like constantly rotating your schedule. And then so even on your time off, like you're not really adjusting. Like
so that's how prototype was. Prototype, when you're on shift work, you're doing 12 hours on, 12 hours off, 7 days a week. And then you get 36 hours off to rotate your clock back 4 hours. And then you do swings, mids, days. So it's 3 cycles of 12 on, 12 off, 7 days straight with a brief reset period between, and then another week of training. And you do that continuously until you qualify a prototype. And then you go to the carrier and you do, 3-section duty. We got lucky in my watch officer section. We got kind of fat. There was a point where we were in, I think, 5-section was the best we ever had. But then you go into a holiday stand-down period like Christmas, and half the department wants to take leave. Well, that means that the half that's left is doing 2-section,
Wow.
24 on, 24 off.
That's it.
So
Now I know why there's retention issues, right? Like you got.
Yeah. So then the nuclear Navy, it's, I love Navy nukes. I love the clowns, but I do not miss the circus. So retention is pretty poor. Between submarine officers and nuclear surface warfare officers, I believe the number is still somewhere between 8 and 12% retention, beyond the pay grade of 03. And it has to be the lifestyle. Current bonuses are in excess of $50,000 to $55,000 a year, and that is not enough to retain officer talent into the senior pay grades. So actually for the reactor officer, so think about this, as a nuke SWO, you go back and forth between the conventional fleet and your nuke duty. So you'll do your division officer tour, power school, your nuke tour. You'll get a little brief shore duty if you're lucky. Then you'll do a conventional department head tour on a ship back to like a destroyer or cruiser. And then you'll go be a nuclear department head back on a carrier. And then you'll get a little break. And then you'll be an executive officer of a warship, a commanding officer of a warship. So you will command a destroyer. You're at like 18 years of service at this point. And then you'll go back to a carrier to be the reactor officer, to be in charge of all the reactor department as a post-command 05. The retention issues right now have caused the Navy to make reactor officers a spot promote to 06. From the day you are selected for reactor officer, you rate the pay of a Navy captain, colonel in the Air Force. Bonuses, full pay, all of it. And I think, you can look it up because all the pay scales are online, but it's in excess of $200,000 a year. And they only need 10 reactor officers because there's only 10 carriers. But there are so few nuke SWOs left that's what they've had to do is make them spot promote billing. It is a hard life. It's a very, well compensated job. I believe it's professionally rewarding. Like I got a lot of professional accomplishment and, good feeling about this. I am making the steam that is moving this island across the ocean. I am the one creating that steam that is shooting those jets off the flight deck. Like that's pretty cool. But it is a heavy burden that, takes its toll over time. If you take into account like the training underways, the Rim of the Pacific exercises that went down in 2018, and like duty days of having to be on the ship. Well, actually not even duty days, just underway days. I did all the math one time, and I spent over 2 years of my life at sea.
Wow.
Pretty easy to understand the retention problems when you do the math there.
So like I said, I got a lot of professional gratification out of the work that I did. You just can't do it forever, which I think is where Clayton's going next. But
I think so.
Yeah. Well, before we get too far into the transition, though, I think on the Vincent is where, I mentioned, that was my biggest realization of the cultural differences between branches. So some of it we talked about, we alluded to earlier, right? Like the Navy has, I would say, far more established culture than the Air Force. Like in terms of, it's been around for our lifetimes, but realistically, Air Force, like a baby service. Well, now we've got the Space Force, I guess, which is the baby service, but a baby service only been around since 47. So that's realistically not a lot of time to have developed a culture, especially when you think about the types of things that the Navy and the Army have been through as a service, right? The world wars, etc. So for me, it was interesting to see going onto the ship, the differentiation between officers' quarters and officer areas of the ship and enlisted areas. But what really got me was in the enlisted dining area, the section that was just for chiefs, and how much nicer, even the table coverings and stuff and the seats
chairs
compared to the rest of the dining area for enlisted sailors. I was like, oh wow, that is way different. That is something that's much different than the Air Force standard, where I think the senior NCO ranks in the Navy carry a lot more weight in terms of customs and courtesies that are allowed or afforded to you compared to like your Air Force counterparts?
Yeah, so the chief petty officer is kind of what we call the backbone of deck plate leadership. So the deck plate is literally the thing you walk about on the deck, like especially in a propulsion plant or about a ship, it's the floor, right? So chiefs shouldn't be in the office; they should be out on the decks. The old adage I always like is, to see a chief with shiny boots, he's hanging out in the office too much. Boots are meant to be scuffed up because you're going up and down ladders and all around the ship. So
Yeah.
the chief's mess is always kind of the backbone of deck plate leadership. Every division is going to have a junior officer, either an ensign 01 or a lieutenant JG 02, as their division officer, and the chiefs really embrace the idea that they are supposed to help train the JOs. This is my JO. I need to marry up with them and teach them how to be a division officer. So I think that is the most important relationship on a ship, is the relationship between Divo and chief. If that relationship is sour, that division is going to fail. So I've had the opportunity of working with quite a few chiefs so far in my career, and all of them have been around the 18-year mark, and all of them have been ready to retire, which is kind of a blessing and a curse. But as long as, with somebody with that amount of experience, they deserve to be listened to. And so I listen, I take everything on board, and I just make sure that we know up front, like, Chief, you and I are going to have conversations with the door closed, but at the end of the day, it's going to be my call. And when we open the door, we present a united front. Whether you agree with me or not, my decision is final. And, 9 times out of 10, we're in lock and step. But for the one out of 10 times where we're in disagreement, I get the 51%. I have seen many a junior officer fail because they did not learn how to get along with their chief.
I think that's something that, like, where the Air Force could learn from the Navy too, is like, so in our like little brown book, it outlines in there that we as senior NCOs, that is our job, is to develop the officer corps, especially junior officers, right? But I don't think as a service, we really focus on that aspect of being a senior NCO. That's something the Air Force could learn from the Navy and be better for it. We focused a lot more on having the enlisted guys develop, or senior enlisted guys develop our junior officers. So they weren't so much like acting alone and unafraid, or being developed in a stovepipe by their other like superior officers, because they're, at the end of the day, like those junior ranks, like they're the ones that are generally being asked to lead the majority of the enlisted force. And so if they're only getting their mentorship from above and not from below, like I feel like we're missing out on a large swath of career development and professional development.
Well, just like you have, we call it a commanding officer, the CO, the XO, executive officer, which I think you guys call a DO, and then a CMC, command master chief, and that's a command triad. And that triad is always presenting a unified front. And I have just always made that same model in my division, right? My chief is my enforcer, my technical expert. That relationship is absolutely key, because it's not just about division officer and chief petty officer. That is about a relationship that you have to cultivate as an officer at every level as you go forward. So when you become a department head, you're going to have a senior chief or a master chief working with you, right? Or when you become a CO, you're going to have an XO. So that's the time to learn how to work with your number 2, how to develop that relationship and develop those skills early on so that you can replicate it as you go up.
So with that in mind, it sounds like the division between, like, sorry, I feel like I've just interrupted you 1,000 times today, but it feels like that division from junior enlisted to senior enlisted, or from like even from E6 to E7 in the Navy, is almost like intentional. If you're forcing like your E6 and below to kind of pay very similar customs and courtesies to their E7 and to their chiefs that they are to at least to their junior officers, then that probably says a lot about like where they fall in the hierarchy to the rest of the junior enlisted, which I don't think that I'd ever really thought about it in that way, but I think maybe that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think it is kind of unique to the Navy, because in the Army, I don't think it's the same. The Marine Corps, I think, follows a little bit, but Navy Chief, Navy Pride, they're still enlisted, but we changed their pant color, right? So
yeah,
our work uniform is khakis. Officers wear khaki pants with a khaki shirt. Enlisted wear black pants. But when you become a chief, you get to wear khaki pants. You get to wear a combination cover. And you get to wear a khaki garrison cover. You have an officer's uniform with chief insignia.
Which for the rest of us is really annoying.
It's really
because Because if you're walking around, like, so especially if you're not used to seeing like enlisted sailors, like you're just walking around and you see this looks, walks, talks like an officer, has shiny rank, and you're like go to salute it, and you're like, oh fuck, that was not. Like,
Those are anchors.
yeah, but it's like you don't ever notice it until it's too late. You can kind of cheat sometimes, right?
Yeah.
You're like, black pants, got that one. Like, cool, I can skip it. And you're like, everything else like kind of looks the same. You see something shiny, damn it.
But I mean, that is kind of cool because you kind of almost like pay homage to the amount of time and service that they have put in.
Well, and the authority of their position.
And the authority of their position. I think it's cool what you guys do is making sure that it's a little bit more special, but they've earned that right to be a little bit more special.
And I think at least comparing, again, I can only speak for the intel career field, but I think that the Navy generally places more responsibility on their E7s than we place on ours. What's funny about that conversation is like I went into this conversation thinking of like Navy culture with the chiefs as like a net negative. And then like just talking through it was like, oh, okay, like I kind of get that more now.
That's
and like maybe there's some things, and I'm sure there's things that could be learned other ways, right? Like maybe there's some goodness to like the fact that our relationships and rank boundaries in the Air Force tend to be more fluid. And so you can get away with things that like I have seen in joint environments, other services not be able to get away with. Anyway, cool.
When it comes to the separation between enlisted and officer, I don't know. I take my job seriously. I don't take me very seriously. So especially now as an attorney, I work with clients of all pay grades. I try to make myself as approachable as possible.
We'll give you one opportunity to throw spears at the Air Force officer corps. Do you know of any cultural differences between Navy and Air Force officers?
Yeah, we work.
I was like, all right, I feel like I need to at least give you this opportunity since I kind of took a shot at Navy chiefs. Like, seems fair.
I've met a handful of Air Force officers. I'm still friends with some of them. To be honest, I don't know what you guys do.
Just be like everybody else. Assume like all Air Force officers just fly planes. Actually, all of us. The amount of times I've been asked what I fly. That's not how that works.
I feel like the Air Force officer community is more like a corporate business than a branch of the military. What do you do?
Yeah, I will say that checks for me outside of like the operational communities, right? So like your pilots, your navs, your EWOs, like they're tend to be more like what most people from the outside would consider military, like, but the rest of the Air Force, whether it's, maybe I should exclude like cops and maintenance. They're kind of their own thing too. I would say of the services, it is the most corporate. I digress. I just figured I'd give you your shot to throw some spears at the Air Force there. So, all right, moving on. So we've already mentioned that you're a lawyer now. So what was that transition like? Had you always had an interest in like law or becoming a lawyer, or was it something that you were just ready to jump ship from nukes and that was a best available option?
So back in high school, like I wanted to be a lawyer. Like I thought that's what I wanted to do with my career. I wanted to be a judge eventually. So, before you can get a Juris Doctor, your law degree, you have to have a bachelor's degree. So I was like, well, I got to get that done first. So, Naval Academy, here we come. So my diversion into the nuclear Navy was kind of a little bit of a sidetrack. So there's this program in the Navy called a law education program where you can, before your sixth year of commissioning, your sixth anniversary of commissioning, you can apply to laterally transfer to the JAG Corps, and the Navy will pay for your law school. And then after law school, you owe the JAG Corps 6 years of service. It's basically another devil's deal where they get 2 years for every year that they fund. So about 4 or 5 officers are selected every year for LEP. The vast majority of the JAG Corps, there are about 1,000 JAGs in the Navy. The vast majority of them, like 90%, come from the private sector and directly commission, or they come out of law schools and commission into the JAG Corps. So they all go through ODS, Officer Development School. It's like 6 weeks of learning how to use your knife and fork. And they commission directly, just like a doctor or staff corps, any other professional. That's how they would commission. So as a LEP, you're kind of unique in that you're one of the few who has laterally transitioned. So about 120 people or so applied for fiscal year 19, and I was one of 5 selected. And I kind of had to play career chicken with my detailer because he told me, well, like we've got you locked in to go be an instructor, and it's pretty good shore duty, but if you want to roll the dice for the JAG Corps, like you're going to lose this spot and so on. And I was like, okay, cool. They also did not have enough people from my year group commit to being department heads yet. And so he sent me an email. Was like, hey, by the way, we don't have our quota filled for nuke officers sticking around in the Navy. And I don't think our community can afford to lose you. We're not going to release your package to the JAG Corps.
Oh, wow.
Not going to let you compete to go for the LEP program. So I sent a politely worded email back that basically said, you're looking at this the wrong way. I am going to law school. Whether or not I stay in the Navy is the question. The only
Because at that
way,
point, your service was up, right? Like your
my
5
obligation
years,
was done.
your obligation was done.
And so I said, the only way I'm going to stick around and take the blood money to be a department head is if you let me apply for LEP and the JAGs don't want me. Like, you have to release my package, at least let me compete. But if they don't want me, then I'll come back on bended knee. So, they took the bluff and released the package to the board. I was on deployment, and it was the day before we pulled into Manila, March of 2018. I got the word that I had been picked up for the law education program. The Navy was going to send me to the University of San Diego School of Law because Erin still had some time at her squadron at Marine Corps Air Station Miramar. We owned a house in San Diego, so it made sense. I didn't really want to go anywhere else. And I walked off the ship in July and started law school in August.
Wow.
So did 3 years at the University of San Diego, which was an absolute blast. It was the first time in a long time, like ever, where I only had to worry about me. I didn't have other midshipmen to worry about. So I went, law school was great. I wore flip-flops every day, Hawaiian shirts, and my sole job was to I was being paid.
You went full San Diego.
I loved it.
That was hashtag real school.
Yeah, that was
college. Hashtag college.
Real college.
Yeah, so for real quick for those Air Force dudes listening, we got real creative with our version of this program, and it's called FLEP. So literally the same thing, but funded legal education program, but same program on the Air Force side.
Same. Yeah.
Wow.
So I had law school classmates who were straight out of undergrad, 5 years my junior.
You felt like Billy Madison in there where you're like...
A little bit, but law school is stressful because people are afraid to get called on. Most of these guys coming out of, undergrad never did the readings in undergrad, so they're not reading for their law school classes. Newsflash for anyone listening who wants to go to law school. There's only one exam. It's at the end of the semester. And if you don't know the stuff, you're going to fail. So coming from mathematics and nuclear engineering to law, I had a very different frame of mind about how I looked at things. I was able to piece apart logic differently than my classmates. I had mandatory writing classes. I have never thought myself a good writer. I published an article in a law review, and I still don't think I'm a good writer. But I wanted to do good in law school, and I wanted to learn this practice really well. That's one thing that the Nuke Navy taught me was how to work hard. So I started early on every assignment. I read everything in detail. I would go and research. Like, there was a footnote dropped in the casebook. I would go and read that source because I wanted to know everything about what I was studying. And so law school is absolutely amazing. I was not ready to go to law school coming out of the Naval Academy. I needed those 5 years in the fleet to really figure out how to work hard and also how to prioritize and figure out what I wanted to do with the next phase of my life. So I was not ready for grad school. While in law school, over the summers between 1L and 2L year, I worked at the Defense Service Office West for the JAG Corps. At that time, there was a Navy SEAL on trial for murder named Eddie Gallagher. And his lead defense counsel was a guy named Tim Parlatore, who also happens to be a Naval Academy grad, class of 2002. And so leading up to the trial, which occurred while I was there, the defense team needed some logistical help on managing some of the discovery and some of the documents and things. So I stepped in to help out. And in return, Tim let me have the fly-on-the-wall view of the defense team. So I was in all the conferences, all the witness preps, all of the practice examinations, everything. I got to see that as a newly minted first-year law student. Or one year into law school, I got to see all of that. So
it's got to be a wild experience. You're a first-year law student, and you're getting a front row seat to probably the biggest, definitely the most publicized, military, courts martial I'm struggling to think of like anything else that would have been more publicized in terms of like military courts or courts martial than the Eddie Gallagher trial.
Gallagher's
And
probably
certainly more polarizing.
Yeah, polarizing for sure. Chief Gallagher is technically on my conflict log as a client, so I won't go into details, but it was an amazing experience as a law
Hashtag
student.
humble brag.
And, I'm very thankful for running into Tim Torre for that opportunity because it's the opportunity of a lifetime for a young law student in San Diego.
If you don't know what we're talking about and you're looking for more information, he wrote a book about it. Not Cam, but Eddie Gallagher wrote a book about it called The Man in the Arena. That's pretty good. And if you're like, hey, that's going to be very one-sided because it's just his perspective and it's biased, you're right, but it's good. And there's also a documentary on Apple TV Plus.
The
hold
line.
On. Yeah, I think that sounds right.
Now, who played you in that? Who played the flying wall in the?
Who's like random law student sitting in the
random law student number one? Is that you? Who played?
I'm going to look through the credits for that now. Like law student.
I stayed in the background on all that. You will not see me in any of the press conferences or any of that stuff. I stayed well away from the limelight.
Yeah, that was you were right. It's called The Line on Apple TV Plus. But in my opinion, for what it's worth, both very good. But anyway, I know you have to skirt around a lot of that stuff. I thought it was really cool. Like one, that you had that internship available to you, and like the odds of that the internship existed and that trial happened to be going on in your first year of law school.
Just
maybe
the
got to be some sort
of
divine intervention there, putting you in a place that maybe you needed to be to learn some things moving forward.
It was pretty cool. But yeah, an amazing experience. I'll get to where I am now, I guess. So between second year and third year of law school, I interned with the Commander Naval Surface Forces Pacific. So the 3-star admiral that's in charge of all surface ships in the Navy. I worked with his staff judge advocate, his lawyer, or lawyers. He had multiple, and worked in that office, which was cool because it was different than the military justice court martial side of the JAG Corps. It was more of the general counsel being an advisor type. So I got to see both sides of that. And while I was there, the Bonhomme Richard caught on fire. And so I was part of the initial kickoff of the investigation of the Bonhomme Richard investigation. So, and I had actually I had cruised on the Bonhomme Richard as a midshipman during one of my summer cruises at the Naval Academy, which was a little bittersweet to see her burning as I was driving to work every day. But I
had kind of forgot about that until you mentioned it.
But also in law school, outside of the JAG Corps, I worked for 2 federal judges. So I worked for a magistrate judge in the Southern District of California.
Is that where you got to do some? Second Amendment work, or was that?
That's the other judge I worked for. So I worked for a judge on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, doing a lot of en banc review, a lot of internal memos and things like that, recommendations as far as evaluating appeals, the merits of them, things like that. But I also had the opportunity to work on the initial draft of an opinion regarding the interpretation of the Second Amendment, which was an absolute blast. And then Aaron took orders to Quantico, and I took orders to DC, and we moved over here to Virginia. And for a year and a half now, I've been practicing law. I was a military prosecutor, so a trial counsel for about a year, and now I'm doing some legal assistance work, helping clients with landlord-tenant disputes, doing their wills, their powers of attorney, things like that. So
is it, in the time that you've been in the JAG Corps so far, is it what you expected?
So I think the JAG Corps in the Navy is really trying hard to be like the rest of the fleet. And I think in an effort to integrate into the force and to integrate into the fleet, there is this push that we should be naval officers first and lawyers second. But I think we did a little bit of a disservice in minimizing the practice of law. Because we are at the intersection of the profession of arms and the profession of law. And I feel like oftentimes, and I'm not the only JAG that believes this, I feel that we sacrifice the profession of law for the sake of the profession of arms. Some of it is institutional and structural that can't be changed. Like we have very high turnovers. And some of it is just bureaucratic, like all of the requirements of the Navy, all of the GMTs and the diversity training and sex assault training and all this other stuff. There's so much other stuff that I have to do in a given day where I should be seeing like 5 or 6 clients a day. I have time for 3. And so it's like, but my primary job is to be a legal assistance attorney. It is to get the wills done or get the landlord-tenant dispute done or put those court proceedings on hold so that this sailor can deploy or so that this warfighter can do their job. It's to support the warfighter. But very little of what I do is the practice of law in support of the warfighter. So I think there's this misalignment of professional expectation and professional competency as to what we do as JAGs. But that's kind of where I'm at with the JAG Corps. Now, compared to what I was doing, really getting to the bulk of the question, compared to what I was doing, like I'm not standing watch for 24 hours every third day. I'm not deploying for 6 months. I'm not seeing other lieutenants go to non-judicial punishment for having a valve out of position, right? Things that we do very well, I think, are work-life balance, having recuperation and rest for mental health, because we do deal with a lot of, especially as a prosecutor, you deal with a lot of material, especially evidence that is not good for the mind. So like the flexibility and the work-life balance being the focal point of like one of the Judge Advocate General's like core tenets, I think is very good. On the whole, like compared to other sectors of the fleet and other communities in the fleet, the Navy JAG Corps is a really great place to work.
All right, so I got one more law question for you before we get into some of the fun stuff. So you've done prosecution and now you're doing like the legal assistance. Any as much as you have say in it, any interest in flipping to the defense side?
Yeah, I didn't get to choose. It's a 50-50 split when you're a new tour and you show up to a region. They kind of just divvy you up like as you show up, like a metronome back and forth. So the metronome hit on me to be a prosecutor. I actually really enjoyed my time as a prosecutor. You know, when you step up to the podium and you say, "My name is Lieutenant Cameron Wright and I represent the government of the United States," you know, it kind of sends chills down your spine. And as a prosecutor, you're not trying to win, right? You are trying to lay the facts out before a neutral arbiter. And, you know, I remember actually, so the one general court martial that I tried, I was the third chair for a 3-victim sex assault case. We tried it all the way to verdict and he was found not guilty. And I remember the other 2 prosecutors were very visibly pissed. And we had an intern at the time and I just started packing up my files in my office, and the intern, she was like, you don't seem upset. And I'm like, no, I'm not upset. Like the day you are emotionally invested and you cry because you lost a case as a prosecutor, you are too far gone. You're too emotionally invested to be a neutral provider of the facts. You are allowed to strike hard blows, not foul ones. So to answer Clayton's question, I absolutely think I would love being a defense counsel as well. Because when you think about it, like, as a defense counsel, you're not necessarily defending this person who could be absolutely guilty or not. You are defending the Constitution and a process. The government has a burden. And, you know, my client deserves a fair trial. And I have no problem seeing that through. I think that's a very noble profession. So I'd love to go be a DC at some point.
That's pretty cool to hear. Like, I don't think until like I was a senior NCO until I'd gone through I went through our like first sergeant symposium. It's essentially for the Air Force guys. It's like a course you have to go through in order to be an additional duty first sergeant. So you can hold the phone and fill that position, which is essentially like they're in charge of care and feeding of the enlisted force and help with morale issues. That's a very, very broad overview of what a first sergeant does. But it wasn't until I went through that course that I think I had like a real appreciation for the breadth of what the JAG Corps does for any service, right? Because there's very few of them and they have a large scope of responsibility. Like think about the number of squadrons and detachments that are just in the Air Force, right? There's a ton of them. And you're like, 5-6 prosecutors at a base or advising every squadron and detachment commander on the base. Like that's a ton of work. Just in terms of picking up phone calls and like, hey, can you give me what does this mean? Or is this okay? Or am I okay to do this? Not to mention the fact that by the way, they're also prosecuting cases and doing all these other things. Like it is a wild amount of work. And so thank you for being a good American and doing what you do. We'll get into we'll kind of wrap this up. We've got 2 segments that we like to close the show with. The first one is called War Stories. Again, the goal here is really to poke fun at the guy that he's probably like a 4-year Marine vet or like a 6-year Army vet maybe. And he's at his local VFW talking about back in his day. Tell me the craziest, most outlandish, hopefully funny story that you've observed in your time in the military. It can be JAG, it can be nuke, doesn't matter.
All right. So most of my, sea stories, I try to relate to a leadership lesson that I learned so I can impart it to others. So this one has absolutely no point. So
those are the best kind of war
stories. You're on track. Yeah.
So on deployment, 2014 on the frigate, we're out off the coast of like Nicaragua, taking like 15, 20-degree rolls. It's a pretty rough night at sea. We were going to do an interdiction, but we had to like drive through this thunderstorm, and there's no moon, midnight, and it's just absolutely dark, pouring rain in this thunderstorm. And so every once in a while, a lightning bolt will come down on the horizon or somewhere, and you'll get this bright flash, and it just completely blinds you. So we have the low visibility detail out. It's pouring rain. I'm on the bridge wing, listening for more sound signals or other lights, so we don't hit any other ships or things like that. And my coveralls are soaked through, and it's just miserable. It's a miserable watch. And it's just so I got two sailors up there on the very tip of the ship, lanyarded in because we're taking heavy rolls too. So like they're lashed in, like tied to the boat. The lightning's getting closer, like comes down, like I don't know, 1,000 yards off the port bow, and I've remarked with my conning officer, I was like, yeah, that one was really close, and bam, another one comes down like 200 feet off the starboard bow. I was like, yeah, that was really close. This is one heck of a storm to drive through, and when the lightning hits the water, it splits like a tree underneath the water, and it's just mesmerizing. All of a sudden, this lightning bolt comes and hits the jackstaff at the front of our bow. Boom! Like lightning bolt on the jackstaff, like where these two watchstanders are, and like sparks, and there was like a mild explosion as this lightning bolt just like struck the ship, and like on the bridge, we were all kind of mesmerized. Like we just took the lightning bolt, and like, the generator's still running, everything like that. And then you hear over the sound powered phone amplifier, you hear like, bridge, folks will CS3 was struck by lightning. What? It's like, tell them to say again. So my bosun like, Forecastle Bridge, say again. It's like, yeah, CS3, pretty sure he just got struck by lightning. He felt a zap. What do you mean he felt a zap? It's like, well, sir, he felt, is he alive? And he's like, yeah, he's here. He's talking to me, but like he got struck by lightning. So I got on the one I'm seeing is like, medical emergency, call away. We don't even have a doctor on board. We have a first class petty officer who's a medic. And so it's like, all right, doc.
What do we do?
We pull the watchstanders back. I get, CS3 gets medical attention, and I'm like, well, I still need to man my low vis detail. And so it's like,
that poor guy. Like, hey, the last guy got struck by lightning. But
so
you're going to go up there?
Go wake up the other low vis guy. And he's like, sure. It's like, yeah, CSSN so-and-so. Go get him up. The boat goes, and he wakes him up. Brings him to the bridge, and Doc comes up to the bridge, and he's like, yeah, CS3's fine. He's going to go to his rack, but he's pretty shooken up and whatnot, and I'm going to evaluate him in sickbay. So at the meantime, the relief shows up, CSSN so-and-so, and I forgot his name, but I was like, he's an E3. And I'm like, so here's the rub. I know you're not supposed to have watch for another 4 hours, but CS3 got struck by lightning. I need you to go down there with CS2 and go back out on the forecastle and man the watch. He looks at me with his big wide eyes, just like, huh? I'm like, that's right, sailor. I need you to go stand the watch.
Where that other guy just got struck by lightning. Go there.
Oh no!
Go stand next to that big metal pole.
I need 2 watchstanders on the bridge, and I need you both wrapped in. And he's like, where'd the lightning strike? At the jackstaff. And where am I standing? You both are going out to the jackstaff. Like,
at the jackstaff.
I'm like, go man the watch.
The look on that poor kid's face.
Go up. Hilarious.
Oh gosh.
All right, so for my war story today, I'll give you options. We can go just funny, or because we have a Navy guy on, we can go maybe a little less funny, but is shots fired at the Army.
Oh, shit.
And I'll let Cam just, all right.
Let's do that one. He didn't even hesitate.
So there I was in Iraq, in Baghdad area on deployment. I was deployed from August 08 to August 09. But while we were there, we were filling what was called JET taskings. I think taskings is redundant because I think it was joint expeditionary taskings. But that was really just code word for the Army couldn't fill all their fucking billets. And so they pulled intel people from the Air Force. But part of the like deal with that was like, hey, we will give you manning and support and augment like what you're doing, but like they only do like the job that they're tasked for. So like I was there to be an interrogation analyst. So like if it did not fall into the realm of interrogation, I was not supposed to touch it. And we're probably about halfway through our deployment at this point. And all of a sudden, Sergeant Major that was in charge of all the Army guys there, we had our own Air Force leadership there, but the Sergeant Major comes out and he's your very stereotypical Army major, right? He's just like old, bald, grumpy dude. Comes out and was like, hey, like, everybody outside. And we're like, the fuck are we going outside for? It's like, it's Baghdad in the summer. Like, what? Why? At this point, it's like May. It's like, why am I going outside? There's air conditioning here. Like, all right. So we go outside and there's like this big pile of sand and like a bunch of bags. And we're looking around like, all right. He's like, we need to fix these bunkers. Senior airman me is like, yeah, cool. I guess like now I'm filling sandbags. Well, I get like 2 sandbags in and there's probably 15 of us Air Force dudes out there at the time. And with 15 Army dudes, my commander in 05 at the time, Wicks, good mentor of mine, great guy, retired as a chief, but he comes out. Remember him distinctly, like they're walking through to get to like where their offices are at. And they see us and like walks up to us, me and my buddy Gaddis. And he looks at us and he's like, what the fuck are you doing? I was like, Sergeant Major told us to fill these sandbags so the bunker needed help. Like, go inside. All right. Heard. So we walk back inside. He kind of follows us inside with the commander. We hear Wicks and the Sergeant Major talking for a second. And of course, Sergeant Major outranks him, but they're having we'll call it spirited conversation that we can hear through the door. And all of a sudden, he comes out and then we all get called to an on-call, like for all the Air Force guys, and then get a subsequent email. And it's like, hey, just so you guys know, in case you forgot, you're on a jet tasking. You do not do any Army shit. Do not let them Army you. And so for the rest of that day, though, I remember some very disgruntled Army interrogators filling sandbags.
Do not let them Army you.
On some level, I'm kind of useless without my partner who is now filling sandbags and can't do interrogations. So like, I guess I'll just wait on him. We'll hang out and see how this works. So good times. Cool. Well, that was War Stories. Sorry,
that could be a t-shirt. Don't let them Army you.
Don't let them Army you. All right. So Cam, we have 2 questions for new guests to close out the show. For you, I have 3 though, and I didn't warn you about the third one. We'll get to it at the end. But the first one, what is your bluff, your bottom line up front? What do you want our listeners to take from you, whether that's something you want them to remember from what we've talked about here, or just a leadership lesson or that sort of thing that you want them to remember?
All right. So living in the present, right? I think there's 2 things that will always lead to discomfort and unhappiness. Living in the past, living in your regret. And then the other is comparing yourself to others. You do either of those 2 things, you're never going to be happy. Be secure in who you are and, live in today for today. Tomorrow might not come, right? So along with that is best advice I've ever been given. Bloom where you're planted. You don't get to decide, where you land or where you wake up necessarily, but doing the absolute best in the situation that you're in is all you can do. You may want to be a lawyer and you're stuck on a ship as a nuclear engineer. Be the best damn nuclear engineer you can. And doors will open for you, but bloom where you are planted. And then on leadership, I always try to follow the mantra of be the leader that others want to follow. That doesn't mean giving them everything that they want. It doesn't, mean placating. It also doesn't mean being a dick. But am I being the leader that others want to follow? Not that they have to follow, not that they're obligated to follow, not that they're ordered to follow, that they want to follow. You keep that kind of as the forefront of your mind as an NCO or an officer. That's kind of a nice northern star to always come back to. And along with that is the mark of a true leader is the legacy you leave when you are gone. Mm-hmm. So if you leave an organization and there is this vacuum, you didn't do it right. You should always be training your relief. You should always, as an officer, division officer especially, you should always be the most replaceable person in a division because you created processes, you created a culture, you trained your relief, you created an environment, and you invested in your people enough to where you made yourself expendable. So those are kind of like my 4 gold nuggets.
So second one, if your life was a TV show or a movie, what would it be, and what character would you play?
So Ron Swanson, Parks and Rec, comes to mind.
Yes.
I espouse a lot of Ron's virtues and vices because I'm having Scottish whiskey.
I mean, it's true wisdom, really.
It really is.
It really is.
I would have at one point said Jack McCoy from Law and Order because I was like all about being Jack McCoy when I was a kid.
Dum-dum.
Now that I am a lawyer and I actually go back and watch episodes of Law and Order, Jack does a lot of unethical shit. Like he is a prosecutor out to win at all costs. Which
that's not how this works.
Which you can do, but I am not about sacrificing integrity or morals to make an easy score. So I would have at one point said Jack McCoy. I think I'm more of a Ron Swanson nowadays. So,
all right. Okay, so I'm going to spring. I said 3 questions. I'm actually going to spring a 4th one on you and this one's your fault because you made me think of it just now while you were talking.
Okay.
So, give me your top 3 traits you want a senior NCO to have from your position.
That's a good one.
Man, that is a quick spring. All right. Yeah, so I think the big one is technical expertise. So my chief or NCO has been doing XX job way longer than I have, right? I acknowledge that there's a technical experience there that I'm just not going to have. And so I want to make sure that we leverage that for the betterment of the team. So, I expect my chief to be fully knowledgeable in their rate and to have the answers, all things technically related to that, to be that expert and to educate me on it as well. With that, I expect them to take care of the guys and also cover my blind spots. If I'm thinking too far outside the box, or if I've got an idea or a way forward where I haven't considered a particular option, I expect my chief to have the questioning attitude to say, hey, sir, have you thought about X, Y, or Z? Or what about this, right?
And that's something that may just come from experience, right? Like if you're talking, you're an 0203, your chief has probably been in, 2 or 3 times as long as you. So it's not necessarily certainly not that they're smarter or anything like that. It's like they may have seen this idea before and seen how it's played out. And then so from the senior NCO perspective, it's like some would say courage. I would say have the balls to speak for yourself and say hey, sir, we've tried this before and it didn't work for X, Y, and Z. And so I try to always give the officers that I'm working for a yes, but.
I always think it's better to be, instead of a no because person, to be a yes if, right?
Yeah.
And even as a judge advocate, I encourage that. You never want to be the lawyer in the room who says, no, we can't do that because, yes, we can do that, Admiral, if X, Y, Z. And so, yeah, exactly. Cover my blind spots, have my back, but, don't let me step on a landmine.
Right. Yeah, it's our job to tell you the risk. You determine whether it's acceptable.
Yep, exactly. So that brings in my 3rd point, right? So open and honest communication is absolutely essential between NCOs and officers, 100%. So the technical expertise aspect, covering my blind spots, watching out for the guys and the good of the division or organization. But the 3rd is be flexible, don't be defensive, right? Realize that we're basically married. And I have 51% of the vote. So I want to hear you out. I want to have the arguments. I want to have the fights, when the door is closed, but realize that it's my vote in the end and it's my assets on the line.
And I know from my end and the enlisted side, sometimes we can struggle with the 3rd point, right? That it's oh, I have this lieutenant that's 2 years out of the academy and I'm giving him my recommendation and he's saying no, he's still going his way. At how does he not see it the way that I see it? But there's a couple things, right? One, you signed up for the military and that's just the way that we're structured, right? It is what it is. 2, you have to think about what does it say to your people? Like at the end of the day, you're a leader to the people that are below you. And then 3, we have to be cognizant of the responsibility that the officers that are appointed over us have, right? That would be my inputs to those 3 is like, just keep those in mind if you were a young NCO or a senior NCO growing into these positions. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for letting me throw questions on you. I have one final question as we leave the Whiskey Tango Chaos podcast. And by the way, thank you to all our listeners for listening. You can find us on @Whiskey Tango Chaos, Facebook, and Instagram. We just recently put out some new merch. So check us out at whiskeytangochaos.com. Unfortunately, you missed the holiday rush. There's no sales going on right now.
No, but there are some cool products like our Defund the Commissary shirt.
We just made a new dad hat and a new hoodie. Also, if you have some questions for us, we try to throw out a weekly prompt for questions, but throw them on any of our posts and we'll make sure to get to them. But as we close out this episode of Whiskey Tango Chaos, which we are affectionately calling the dark side, as we have our first officer on the program, our brother-in-law, Kam. Thank you so much for joining us. My final question is, who is your favorite brother-in-law and why is it me?
Oh, gosh.
No, I'm just kidding. Thank you so much for joining us, Kam. This has been a long time in the making. We tried to do this at Christmas and it just didn't pan out. No. So thank you for giving us your time. I appreciate you a ton. Love you. And thank you for always being supportive and willing to come on and talk with us.
Of course.
And,
thanks for having me on, guys.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you. And again, thank you for listening to the Whiskey Tango Chaos podcast. We will catch you again in 2 weeks. Thank you again. Cheers.
Cheers.